much, Ms Cummins. It's a real pleasure to serve under your chairship, I think for the second time in 2 days, which is truly a privilege for me. I'd like to start by thanking the member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for securing this really important debate today. And I'd also like to thank other honourable and right honourable members for their thoughtful contributions, and in particular my honourable friend, the member for York Central, for a particularly insightful speech. And I think her clarion call for pragmatism over ideology is something that I hope everybody in this chamber today would support. With your permission, Ms Cummins, I'd like to start by setting out the Labour Party's approach to work-based migration in the UK. In a nutshell, we support the principle of a points-based system for migrant workers. It was, of course, I'm sure I won't need to remind the Chamber today, it was, of course, a Labour government that introduced the points-based system in 2008 for immigration from outside the European Union. And we're clear that there will be no returning to the free movement of labour that was a feature of our membership of the European Union. But we're equally clear that we need to build on and improve the points-based system that is currently in place. Our long-term ambition is to ensure that all businesses in every sector and across our public services are recruiting and training as much homegrown talent as possible in order to fill vacancies before they look overseas. For instance, we need to be training up more homegrown doctors, hence our commitment to doubling the number of clinical placements and to setting out a 5 to 10 year workforce plan, which is so desperately needed when you consider the fact that there's a 7 million person waiting list and huge issues around workforce shortages and challenges. And it's for that reason that we know that if you just turn off the tap to migrant labour without the appropriate workforce structures and adequate training and recruitment in place, then our public services will deteriorate, our businesses will struggle to meet our wider economic ambition to make, buy and sell more in Britain. And in the end, it becomes a crutch with more and more jobs eventually disappearing overseas. But if I could just address the comments made by the spokesperson for the SNP, I didn't hear the Shadow Health Secretary's comments today, but what I know is that our policy is very clear. We want to maximise opportunities for homegrown talent, both in terms of doctors, nurses, care workers, but we absolutely recognise that you have to get the balance right to ensure that where we have migrant workers playing vitally important roles, that is what we want to continue to have, but we want to at the same time maximise opportunities for homegrown talent. It's not an either-or question. It's not a binary question. It is a both-and. It is a balancing question, not turning the taps off here and turning the taps on somewhere else, if she wishes to give way, to intervene.
I mean, I appreciate the clarification, but it was quite clear that the leader of the Labour Party said there were too many migrant workers in the NHS. And what the Shadow Secretary of State for Health seemed to be saying, and I can't remember the exact words, but obviously I'll go and look again, seemed to be saying is, yes, OK, we'll allow migrant workers to be our doctors, nurses, whatever, until we've got enough of our own. Well, what does that say to them? You know, you're here when we need you, and when we no longer need you. And I support training up people who want those jobs, training people here. But what does that say to them, those migrant workers who've committed themselves to our NHS, that as soon as we've got enough of our own homegrown people, we're going to kick you out?
Well, I think it would be a caricature of whatever comments were made to say that you're going to somehow stop people that are already here from being here. I mean, that seems to be the logical extrapolation of what the Honourable Lady is arguing, and I do not think that anybody would be arguing that. We value the workforce that we have, but we also want to build opportunities and create more opportunities for our own homegrown talent, and I'm sure that that's something we can all agree on. But we can't have a situation, turning away from the health and care sector for a moment and looking at some of the issues that have been raised around the agricultural sector. We can't have a situation, for instance, as we've had in the farming sector, where 30,000 pigs are being slaughtered and £60 million worth of crops are being burned, which is what happened over the past year. We also know that the construction industry has lost 175,000 jobs in 2020 to 21, and that's had a big impact in terms of projects being slowed down. We know that in September 2021, UK Hospitality called for the government to include the hospitality sector in temporary work visa schemes in the aftermath of COVID-19 and reflecting the need to boost our economy. This call was, of course, echoed by the Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Committee Select Committee report published on the 24th of October 2022, which recommended the introduction of temporary recovery visas for industries, predominantly tourism and hospitality in this case, that are experiencing short-term labour shortages for so-called low-skilled roles. We recognise these challenges, and we feel that the way to find solutions is to go to the heart of the system so that it is better positioned and placed to deliver results on a sector-by-sector basis, pragmatism over ideology, as has already been said. We on these benches are well aware of the flaws in the current points-based system, and we feel that the government is failing to balance the need to encourage businesses to recruit and train homegrown talent with the need to use migrant labour to address short-term pressure points in the labour market. The fundamental weakness is the fact that the government's economic migration strategy is not joined up, so it will struggle to meet the government's economic and public service priorities. For instance, we feel that the Migration Advisory Committee and the Skills and Productivity Council are not as integrated as they could be in terms of making decisions around the shortage occupation lists. And we believe the way to understand what type of support sectors require in terms of short-term support, for instance, access to temporary work visas, is to get this system working properly and with more flexibility. At the heart of this should be a three-way dialogue led and convened by the MAC, drawing together representatives from employers that speak for the sector, trade unions and relevant government departments, to look at the sectors on the Migration Advisory Committee's shortage occupation list in detail. This dialogue would be the mechanism through which decisions were made around the short-term visa schemes, such as the seasonal worker scheme, the youth mobility scheme, and new ideas such as the temporary recovery visa, which is being debated here today. The three-way working group would not only look at the shortage occupation lists, they would also set conditions that companies who have sponsorship licenses would need to meet in relation to workers' rights. This is because we're very worried that the current points-based system is also failing when it comes to the enforcement of labour standards. We know that, for instance, Nepalese health workers, Indonesian fruit pickers and care workers from the Philippines and Ghana are at serious risk of exploitation through recruitment agencies charging fees, leading to migrant workers ending up in illegal debt bondage through having to repay those recruitment fees. Many of these recruitment agencies operate abroad, and it would be good if the government were able to investigate whether work could be done by British embassies overseas to look out for problems and red flag agencies that are suspected of nefarious practices. But we also need to clamp down on illegal practices here in the UK. Of course, it is illegal to charge migrant workers recruitment fees in Britain, but the Association of Labour Advisors said that some employers in the UK are still demanding workers pay for their recruitment fees. We need solutions to these issues. Part of the challenge, of course, we have is that under the last 12 years of successive Conservative governments, the number of labour market inspectors has decreased to one inspector for every 20,000 workers, when the ILO recommends one inspector for every 10,000. I hope perhaps the Minister will share his thoughts on that ratio and whether he believes that it will enable the government to crack down on exploitation. In 2019, the Conservative Party committed to merging the three enforcement bodies, the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate, the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority, and the HMRC's National Minimum Wage Enforcement Teams, into this one enforcement body. Perhaps the Minister could confirm what progress is being made on this, or are we looking perhaps at another broken manifesto promise? The main agency involved in the welfare of seasonal workers is the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority. The scheme operators which are responsible for recruitment must have a licence from the authority and can have it revoked if they fail to abide by certain standards. But the regulator does not routinely carry out inspections on farm premises, and some critics say it lacks the resources to police abuses of workers' rights. We also need to understand, for seasonal workers specifically, What action is being taken by the government to ensure that the 40,000 businesses with sponsorship licences from the GLAA are being properly regulated by HMRC to ensure that they're maintaining high employment standards? I'll take a short intervention.
I thank the honourable gentleman. I wonder if he's aware of another issue that the Daily Record in Scotland revealed the other day, that delivery drivers for Just Eat and Deliveroo and others, but I can't remember which others it was, so I better not say any names, are being able to rent out their accounts, and they're being told that they're responsible for ensuring that the person they rent it out to is allowed to work and has passed basic safety, health and safety. And anyway, that's obviously not happening. So people are having meals delivered. They don't know if that person has passed the checks that they should have passed. But more importantly, or just as importantly, some of those workers who are renting those accounts are not allowed to work, and they are being exploited. And I wonder if he would agree with me that these agencies should be able to look into that as well.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention, and she's absolutely right that there's a vital role to play here in terms of regulation and enforcement. Our major concern is twofold. There's a bit of a kind of mixture of all these agencies not necessarily coordinating together, three main agencies. So let's have a single enforcement body, number one. And number two, let's have the number of labour market inspectors should meet with the ILO standards. Currently 1 to 20,000, it should be 1 to 10,000. And I think those would be major steps in the right direction, and that could be the start of cracking down on that particular issue that she rightly raises. But maintaining standards is not just important for the well-being of migrant workers and for preventing undercutting, it is also good for employers, as we need to make Britain an attractive place to work, not least in sectors such as food and farming, where we're clearly more reliant on migrant workers than in other sectors. The National Farmers Union Deputy President Tom Bradshaw told the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee that whilst the 30,000 quota for seasonal workers' visas in 2021 was a lifeline for the industry, it has not been big enough. We also know the challenge for the sector is not just seasonal but year-round, and we understand that there are real recruitment challenges in relation to the short-term nature of these visas that the government must look at closely. Therefore, we need to be sure the working conditions attached to these visas are as attractive as possible in order to attract the workers that we need and to avoid undercutting. Of course, where sectors and businesses are given permission to recruit from overseas, we need to see commitment to long-term workforce planning. How, for instance, would a company plan to invest in homegrown talent in the long term? What is it doing to invest in R&D, in modernising its technology and its machinery to boost its productivity? Does it have a skills strategy? These are the questions that should be asked of companies as a quid pro quo, really, as part of the conversation about being given shortage occupation and other permissions to bring labour from overseas. What are they doing to show their long-term workforce plan? How are they boosting productivity? These are the questions that government should be asking. There should be a proper dialogue rather than pulling arbitrary numbers out of the air just within the Westminster bubble. Is the government asking for these workforce plans from companies who benefit from the shortage occupation lists? And if not, perhaps the government, the Minister might like to say a few words on that. These are the questions that Labour will be asking as and when we enter government, committed as we are to ensuring that our points-based system strikes the right balance between incentivising employers to train and recruit locally with the right to recruit internationally where required. I look forward to the Minister's responses to my questions, in addition to those raised by other honourable and right honourable members here today. Thank you.